Hey, I'm Andrew,
I'm John.
and we are the hosts of Magnified Pod on the Rock Candy Podcast Network. It's a podcast that we've been doing for almost 3 years. It's a podcast about culture, religion, politics, and the alternate alternative Christian music scene that we both grew up in. And we wanted to share a little bit more about us as we start our third season. We recognize that there are going to be people who are joining the podcast a little late. And uh, a lot of the stories that we've shared over the years are maybe stories that some people at this point are very familiar with, but new listeners don't want to have to necessarily go back and comb through the archives to find like what our deals are, and we don't want to have to rehash them every episode if and every season when people are like, oh man, these guys again talking about themselves for 45 years. I mean, that's our thing. It's a
Right.
long form conversational podcast, so we are going to be chatting at length, but we wanted to take a little time just to say kind of our stories a little bit, our walks, if you will.
Hmm.
I won't, but um, but give a little context to where we're coming from and who we are uh, and what we're bringing to each episode.
Yeah.
So, do you have anything you want to say before we?
No, I think that all sounds good. We will
Okay.
explain a bit about ourselves and what our kind of inspiration for doing the show was and kind of our goal behind it.
Yeah. Um. Yeah, I think what if we want to I can just start a little bit from the beginning of where I had reached out to you in early 2018 about this idea of starting a podcast and wanting to talk about an artist or something that meant a lot to us. And I was like, I had pitched the idea for, I was like, maybe we could do Weird Al. I really like Weird Al, and I know that you were maybe a Weird Al fan, but there's already a Weird Al podcast that was kind of doing that. And then we sort of settled on MXPX because that was something that was really important and big for both of us. And I remember now, famously, you were like, yeah, this sounds great. I just don't know how much time I'm going to be able to to commit to this.
Yeah. I, st- I still don't know, and yet somehow it happens.
Yeah. Yeah, this is after almost 3 years we've gotten to the point where it's like, oh, we're just going to, talk for 4 hours every week and
Right.
spend all this time on social media and doing these videos and
Yeah.
but anyway, so what started out as kind of wanting to talk about albums that were important to us and the kind of the context that we grew up listening to those albums has kind of morphed into something much bigger. And Magnified Pod, which started out as primarily about MXPX, has grown into a community of people that all grew up in a very similar scene, listening to similar bands, and a lot of us are in the same kind of age group, our late 30s, early 40s, wrestling with a lot of the cultural stuff that was very prevalent at the time, a lot of maybe more conservative theology or more problematic theologies that some of us, me specifically, I've grew up Christian as a pastor's kid and uh, left that faith. And I can get into that in a little bit, but um, hearing from so many people about like, oh yeah, I listening to Life in General by MXPX was such a formational record for me, or Upbeats and Beatdowns by Five Iron Frenzy was such a big deal for me. And hearing so many of the same stories over and over and over again makes me just feel like, oh man, we're all connected and uh, bonded in this way, or as Mike would say, bonded by the brotherhood of God.
I was just about to say
I, even though we haven't covered MXPX in a couple years now,
those
it's
lines are never
yeah,
never
it's
leaving
never
our brains.
leaving, never, never, never. Uh, just like we're all connected through this music, and how we navigated growing up in this scene as adolescents and teenagers in our early 20s, and where we are now, it's endlessly fascinating to me, because my deconstruction and deconversion process has led me to a different place. But MXPX and Slick Shoes and Five Iron Frenzy, these bands that you know are rooted in these Christian record labels and Christian lyrics, still have so much significance to me.
Yeah.
So I want to turn it over to you for a bit.
Yeah, I mean, the original idea was just covering a band that we both loved that hadn't been covered extensively elsewhere. And then I
Right.
think that naturally led to a whole discussion of the kind of scene that they grew out of, that we were part of. Um, that led to this exploration of the idea of the like Christian bookstore alternate universe idea we talk about a lot, where it's like a specific world kind of from the 90s youth group, um, evangelical like scene of cultural Christianity at the time, and how there were genuinely really good bands that were a part of that meant a lot to us, even if we can look back on some of the cultural baggage of that time with some skepticism.
Yeah.
um but that, we had a great time talking about that band, and then we were like, in a similar vein, the other band from that world that kind of meant the most to both of us was Five Iron. And that led to like even more just interesting discussions, I would say, in terms of like how the politics of Five Iron was influential for us, and the kind of openness they've had about their spirituality and theology over the years. But once we went through those bands, there was like not any others really from that world that had as deep a discography, that we were really passionate, both of us, about going through everything.
Right.
So we kind of wanted to keep this world going. These bands have been a jumping off point for discussion about broader things the whole time. So we wanted to keep talking about this world of bands and music that we still like, but still keep tackling some of these big topics.
Yeah. I Some of the topics are so interconnected, and the in this first episode of this season, this third season, talking about the By What Right song by Slick Shoes. Like, how do you
Yeah.
talk about the the 90s Christian uh, alternative music scene without talking about Rock for Life and Christian music festivals like Cornerstone? Like, it's all so connected. So
Yeah.
you can't extract those two things. And so like, and we were impacted and affected by those things in different ways. Like, um, just one second. I'll edit this part out of the video, but I just need to. Um, so yeah, like I'd said, I grew up in a as a pastor's kid, and I took my faith extremely seriously. And throughout my adolescence and my early childhood, I had I carried along a lot of shame and guilt, uh, and an obsession with sin and doing the right thing, whatever that looked like. And as I got older, a lot of that became connected to sin as it related to my sexuality and my body, and the sort of the body shame that comes with a lot of evangelicalism, that like, sex before marriage is wrong, masturbation is wrong, lusting is wrong, pornography is wrong. There's a whole host of things of like we were told all the things that were wrong, but no tools on how to navigate those as
Right.
kids with hormones going wild in our bodies. And and so I'm this preteen and teen kid, like, trying to find a, like, well, what is the appropriate way to be attracted to girls? Like, how do I do that? Like, what is the godly way to do that? And it's like I wasn't given any
Right.
way to do that, and so you're just like left to your own devices. Essentially, it's just like, here's a list of things you don't do.
Yeah.
Good luck. And that was a big struggle for me. And one of the bigger turning points for me was as the evangelical church seemed to move further and further right in theology, around issues of war and vengeance as it relates to war and capital punishment uh, and things like the LGBTQ community, uh, alienating and othering groups of people. That became a lot of these issues became bigger and bigger turnoffs for me. And I, when you couple that with feeling like, okay, I'm praying and I'm praying and I'm praying and I'm trying to do the best I can, as I've always done, tried to be very authentic in my faith, which is something that has been my life goal, is to be authentic and be real and be not fabricate emotions. Like, I didn't want to go into a worship service and be like, okay, let me just get caught up in the music and then tell myself that that's God.
Yeah.
That was never my deal. And it's like, okay, so I'm praying and I'm trying to do the right thing and I'm trying to be in the word and I'm trying to, like, all the things that you're told were the ways that you connect with God, and like I wasn't. And it's like, why is everybody else able to connect with God? And everybody had their answer as to why they were and I wasn't, and nothing was ever satisfying. And so, around my close to my 30th birthday, I is when I sort of let my full on deconstruction begin and no longer identified as a Christian, and went through the process of trying to figure out what it is I did believe in and what values I held as a humanist or atheist or non-theist, however, um, I choose to describe myself these days. It's kind of varies from day to day. Humanist is typically how I uh, describe myself, but um, one of the things that I knew that I wasn't was an anti-theist. I knew that I didn't hate religious people. I knew that I wasn't going to be dismissive of religious belief, um, unless it came down to actively harming people. If someone's beliefs were going to harm somebody, then I would push back on those beliefs. Um, but I still feel that it's very important for me to continue to engage in the culture of faith and still ask important questions and not come to conclusions. I want to have more questions than I have conclusions. That is usually where I land, is not resting in certainty, but keeping the dialogue open and keeping the questions open.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. I feel the same way, even if my walk has been different. Um, yeah, I grew up on the periphery of evangelicalism, but never like fully in it, which I think allowed me to not have some of the baggage that a lot of my friends have had, which has, in a lot of cases, and this is the case with folks we've talked to who are listeners and band members and stuff, that like it was so much, church was so negative for them and the associations with God that they didn't want to have anything to do with it. And I think I am fortunate to have not had some of the worst stuff that the evangelical church, particularly of the 90s, particularly focused on youth, um, was doing. And that allowed me to sort of separate a little bit the sort of cultural Christianity from what I was finding meaningful about faith. So I'm grateful for not having had to parse that stuff as much as some of my friends, although I am sad that that's been the case for so many people.
Yeah.
Um, so I grew up Episcopalian, and, all churches have their problems, but I do feel like my theological understanding was always more centered on grace than shame. And so I think a lot of stuff that I've heard people wrestle with just wasn't really something that tripped me up that much. And we had a pretty big youth group at my Episcopal church. But it was not, it was a very like low church congregation. When I say that, I mean like there's the high church idea of kind of like smells and bells, they call it, of like,
Yeah.
there's a lot of sort of liturgy, there's candles and incense and various robes and all that kind of stuff. And this was like there was like a praise band with electric guitar and, a lot of like former hippies. And that was kind of the vibe. Um, but that also lent itself to like probably a little more evangelical adjacent than a lot of mainline Protestant churches. So the youth group was like kind of a separate deal. Like I'm sure they were teaching sort of Episcopalian ideas, but like mostly it was just like there was like a 90s evangelical youth group. We talked about the high school starter
Yeah.
package. There was that for all kind of churches. It was kind of like, well, we read the NIV Teen Study Bible and we watch, whatever. I can't even think of like examples of stuff that we might watch, but like, and at these places you would find tooth and nail compilations and Christian bands on the wall. I stole the MXPX poster off the wall of my youth group room.
Which is why you're going to hell.
That's why I'm going to hell. So that was my first exposure to any of that stuff.
Yeah.
Went to the Billy Graham crusade through church, DC Talk, performed at that. So anyway, and then I got further into high school and I went to an evangelical covenant high school, which is the denomination Andrew grew up in and the denomination of the college that we met at. And that was my first real like exposure to evangelical culture, which even for that world, the covenant is sort of on the like not extreme end of things, women pastors, etc. But
so progressive.
but we had mandatory chapel, and this had the opposite effect. It made me resent Christianity, and so I kind of like, that was my first deconstruction, was in high school, and kind of feeling like I didn't identify with any of that anymore. And by the end of high school, I had some teachers who really brought in the lens of justice through reading scripture. And I think that informed me socially and theologically in a lot of ways. And I really engaged so much with like my Bible classes eventually in high school that's what I studied in college, was theology. And, to your point about mystery, like I really wanted to study the Bible so that I could figure out the black and white and not have so much gray. I really wanted to kind of have solid footing and foundation. And the more that I studied, and the more that I studied under professors who were people of color or who had an
Mhm.
in-depth understanding of um, biblical study and history being sort of rooted in justice and um, liberation theology, like the more that I found peace in the idea of like the gray is what I find meaningful about
Mhm.
spirituality. So I moved further away from a black and white definition and more to part of what faith in Christ means to me is an embrace of like we're never going to figure all this out. There's too much to figure out. We shouldn't concern ourselves so much with figuring it out or figuring out where other people are at. We should be using our time on earth to do the kind of actions that God would want us to do. So that was kind of what for me in college. Since then, I've worked at a variety of faith-based organizations. I work for a mainline Protestant church today, and it continues to be a really central part of my life. But I think the sort of conclusions that we reached are not dissimilar. And
Yeah.
um, my uh, cynicism is too light a word. My like disdain for a lot of what cultural Christianity is in the West remains really significant.
Yeah.
So it's important to me, but I see how harmful it can be in a lot of ways.
Right. Yes. You know, it's interesting because um as somebody who deconstructed and reconstructed over these past 7 years, I find that, you know, as I went through my phase of like going to atheist conferences and humanist meetings and like atheist meetup groups and stuff, I came to a conclusion that I feel more connected to and seen by and known by people like you, John, and people who grew up in the church, and whether or not that they've left the church or not, uh, or have gone through a deconstruction themselves, but like I feel more at peace with, like, it's strange that my relationships with people of faith feel more significant and similar than my relationships with people that have like us not believing in God does not like unite us. Like, you know, like I can talk to another atheist and be like, "Hey, yeah, we both don't believe in God," but like, what are the other like 99 things
Right.
that they care about? Like, they might care about some of the same social issues, but you and I can talk about, you know, we can talk about we can say like, yeah, let's talk about our walk
Right.
or other evangelical terms, and uh the Christian bookstore scene that we talk about, and youth group, and things that like were central to our adolescence, that like that is a uniting and bonding experience. And that's why all of this feels so big and important, because no matter where we are right now in this moment, that so many people of Magpod Nation have like shared such a similar experience, and like we can come up to each other and, you know, talk about, you know, youth group or certain festivals or other, you know, cringy stuff within evangelical culture, and we're like, oh yeah, totally, I totally get it. Or certain language, there's a specific language and words that are used within in evangelical church that like I don't feel like I need to over explain my
Right.
experience, because it's like, oh, I totally get it. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was there. I totally get it. And if someone like didn't grow up churched at all, they might be like, how could you ever have
Right.
believed in God? Or why was
Yeah.
this, you really went to a Christian festival where they were like saying abortion was homicide. Like they like some of these things that like they just wouldn't
No frame of
understand.
reference for
They
any
have
of
no
that.
frame
Yeah.
of reference, but like for us, it just feels like, oh, of course,
Of
for sure.
course. Yeah. Abortion's homicide.
Yeah, totally, for sure. By what right, John? By what right?
Right.
Uh, stole our right to pray in school. Um, these are Slick Shoes references. Anyway, um, so yeah, like it's weird that I feel more at home with people of faith than I do atheists. Does that make
Sure.
sense? Like it
Yeah.
makes sense in my head.
No, yeah, for sure. I think a lot of what has kept us going for close to 3 years now with the podcast is the realization that there are so many people who share this same background and have landed at a place now that's similar, where it's like, okay, we were going to acquire the fire and Billy
Yeah.
Graham crusades, and yet
Yeah.
today we can joke about how silly that stuff is. Like that there's a shared kind of generation or type of person who has seen that and like understands the impact it has, can look back and laugh at it, but still find aspects of that experience meaningful and part of what formed us. And so like
Yeah.
there aren't it wouldn't seem like there'd be a huge community of people who know those references, want to
Mm-hmm.
talk about weighty topics, are like progressive leaning today,
Yeah.
and think that like MXPX still kicks ass. Like that's like a kind of a weird
Yeah.
subsection of people, but we've really found a lot of them these
That
past few
that
years.
that Venn diagram, it's a small slice, but it's a hearty slice of
Right.
people.
It is. Yeah. So it's so grateful finding other people like that. And I think to your point of saying, like, does that make sense? Like, yeah, I think we're all sort of versions of that, finding each other and
Yeah.
enjoying discussing this stuff together.
Yeah. Yes. And we will
So
continue
that's
to
our
do so.
deals.
That's our deals.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that gives you a little bit more of a frame of reference. There's way more we could say, but I feel like this gives you a little sense if this is your first time here. Uh this will give you a sense of like, is this a podcast I want to listen to? And if you've made it this far into listening to us, then chances are that would probably be yes. And if you do want to listen to us, we hope you reach out, connect with us on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. Leave us a voicemail or an email. We'd love to hear from you and hear some of your thoughts. So
Thanks, everybody.
thank you.
Bye.